49ers First and 10 podcast presented by Cisco. I'm your host, Brianna McDonald, joined by 49ers team reporter, Lindsay Polaris. Today, we're diving deeper into some NFL offseason news. We're going to be recapping the NFL Scouting Combine, taking a look at the free agency period that's coming up real soon, and taking a preview look into the 2025 NFL Draft. But to start, let's recap the Scouting Combine that just wrapped up earlier this last week. And what's going to be really interesting about this combine is that we're going to be looking at a lot of speed in these upcoming prospects and upcoming NFL draft picks. The 2025 combine participants recorded, on average, the fastest 40-yard dashes at a single combine since 2003, an average of 4.6 seconds in the 40-yard dash. And the fastest was a defensive back out of Kentucky, Maxwell Hairston. He ran a 4.28 40-yard dash. And another really interesting prospect that I wanted to cover with you, Lindsay, was a defensive back out of South Carolina, Nick Emanwori. What do you know about him and what makes him really interesting to the Niners?
Yeah, so his measurables pretty crazy. So 11 feet 6 inches on the broad jump, a 4.38 40-yard dash, and also the highest vertical of any of the prospects coming through the combine, 43 inches. And then also I wanted to call attention to his perfect 10 relative athletic score. That is pretty historic. He is rated first among over 1,000 strong safeties that have come through the combine from 1987 to 2025.
Wow.
And he's of particular interest to this podcast because he has been slated as a mock draft prospect to the Niners, who are picking number 11 overall. Obviously, these mock drafts are all speculation. I think that's kind of the bulk of the media coverage that we're getting.
And the fun that you could play with.
This is the fun part, right? So this is a name we've seen in several mock drafts. I think just really cool to see the measurables that he was able to put up at the NFL Scouting Combine. Certainly very impressive to a lot of teams, and I do think this is someone that saw their draft stock rise over the 4-day event.
Yeah, hit the highest vertical at 43 inches, which is a standout to the group, who the second highest is only at 41.5 inches, only at also pretty impressive. He also had the furthest broad jump, like you mentioned, at 11 feet and 6 inches. And yes, he's been mock drafted to the 49ers as a first-round pick by CBS Sports' Ryan Wilson. So a prospect to keep your eyes on as we head into the draft. But now that the combine is over, all eyes are shifting over to the next date in the NFL offseason calendar, which is the free agency signing period. The 2025 new league year and free agency signing period begins at 1 p.m. Pacific time, our time, 4 p.m. New York time on March 12th. So what's that to look there for?
Well, before we get to that, right now, we are literally at another deadline, which really doesn't affect the Niners. They opted to not use the franchise tag, but that franchise tag period was from February 18th to March 4th, which is today as we are recording this podcast. So a non-issue for the Niners. But yes, like you mentioned, the new league year is right around the corner. And certainly there are several players on the 49ers roster that are set to become free agents, some that have already been taken care of. I did publish an article much earlier in the offseason talking about the full gamut of players set to become free agents. The 49ers have taken care of some of those names, and I'll read them off to you. There was a pretty sizable group of exclusive rights free agents, and all of those guys on that list have been taken care of. They are on one-year deals. That includes defensive lineman Evan Anderson, defensive lineman Alex Barrett, linebacker Jalen Graham, defensive lineman Sam Okuwanu, offensive lineman Austin Pleasance, tight end Jake Tonjes, and tight end Braden Willis. We also saw that offensive lineman Ben Barch, who came to the 49ers last offseason as a free agent after spending his first 4 seasons in the league with the Jaguars. He has also been re-signed. So that's all the business that's happened up to this point. We also saw linebacker Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles was released earlier in the offseason. Still a lot of other names that are on this list, so we can go through them. We have restricted rights free agents. So this is similar to what we saw with wide receiver Juwan Jennings. Only 2 names on that list. It's linebacker Curtis Robinson and then also running back Jordan Mason. So the 49ers have to decide what type of tender they would like to take with those guys. It's a little bit different than just unrestricted free agents. That list, very, very long. So I'll read through those names again.
Let's go.
A lot of names: Brandon Allen, Aaron Banks, Chris Conley, Josh Dobbs, Khalil Davis, Deshaun Gibson Sr., Kevin Givens, Dre Greenlaw, Javon Hargrave, Charlie Heck, Talanoa Hufanga, Nick McLeod, Elijah Mitchell, Jalen Moore, Pat O'Donnell, Eric Saubert, Patrick Taylor Jr., Charvarius Mooney Ward, Rock Yassin, and Isaac Yadam. So as we're taking a look at this long list, Bree, where do you see the biggest needs for the 49ers in free agency and also the draft, which is right around the corner?
Yeah, well, it's always hard at this point, like you were saying, with mock drafts happening. There's also a lot of mock ideas in free agency. We don't know exactly which moves the Niners are going to take during the free agency period versus during the draft. So I do know that John Lynch very highly interested in creating a younger roster. So we're definitely going to look at some needs in the draft. But with free agency coming up, it's pretty much all positions down the roster. The 2024 roster is going to be looking much more different from the 2025 roster. But as we look at the mock drafts and what's slated in the draft, we've got defensive tackle, offensive lineman, cornerback, linebacker, and safety. So I think maybe that's where the Niners are going to target some of the younger talent. But when you're looking at free agency and picking up some of those veteran players, you never know where it's going to be from defense to offensive side. I'm thinking a lot of the linebackers are going to be taking a harsh look at them. Somewhere defensively in the backfield, you never know how Robert Saleh is going to influence this free agency period. So it's kind of all over the board. But what's really interesting, I think, with the mock drafts and draft season coming up is that our football ops are going to be balancing, okay, who have we picked up in free agency since that will be done and over with? And then who are the best players available now that we're picking right outside of the top 10? So there's going to be a lot of elite talent there. And then what are the targeted positions of need as we enter the new year? So there's a lot to juggle with as we stand right here in this state without knowing any free agency moves and without knowing what the draft is going to look like. So it's kind of all over the board, Lindsay. But what do you think are going to be some of the free agency covers versus mock draft covers? And what positions do you think we're going to go in starting sooner?
I think especially with Robert Saleh coming in as the kind of, I say new defensive coordinator, he's obviously been here before. I do think he is going to have a heavy hand in both free agency and the draft. And I did want to reiterate the point that you made earlier. John Lynch and company, really, the front office staff is really examining this roster. And it really is about sustainability. As everyone knows, this 49ers team, star-studded, which usually means that the salaries also follow that, and also a lot of veteran players. So yes, I think that is really one of the big concerns, creating some financial flexibility and then also bringing on some youth to this roster. I was reading a report by ESPN's Nick Wagner. This roster at the start of the 2024 season, average age of a player just under 27 years old, which is fairly veteran for this league because your time goes very, very quickly in the NFL. So again, looking really to the draft, I think, to reload this 49ers roster, not just for, the immediate future, but the future to come. Like looking down farther down the line, how you've seen guys drafted and developed, like a George Kittle, a Fred Warner, a Renardo Green is like a very good recent example of someone who turned out to be a really, really good rookie, and you just expect to see him blossom later on in the years. Same thing with safety Malik Mustafa. So you want to create that pipeline of talent that you grow and develop in-house, and they become your future superstars. And I do think we're going to see a little bit more of an emphasis on that this offseason.
Yeah, and the 49ers will have 10 picks to work with in this year's draft, so a perfect opportunity to start bringing in a new lifeline of players. And so far, looking at these mock drafts, a lot on the defensive side of the ball, I think analysts are really curious to see how Robert Saleh is going to influence this year's first-round pick. 10 picks overall to start. And the latest projections, player we mentioned earlier, Nick Emmanwori from South Carolina, a safety there. Also, defensive tackle Mason Graham out of Michigan is a really interesting player to look at when you're starting to create your mock drafts. Daniel Jeremiah called him a dream scenario pick for the Niners. He's ranked 4th overall on Daniel Jeremiah's draft board, and he called it a home run pick for the Niners because he has amazing tape, but his measurables in the combine didn't quite match up to what a lot of NFL prospects were thinking. So he could be a perfect pick for the Niners right outside of that top 10. But on the offensive side of the ball, you could also take a look at Amon Membo. He's an offensive lineman out of Missouri, or Josh Simmons, an offensive tackle out of Ohio State. Also, Kelvin Bakes Jr., a tackle out of Texas. So some names floating around and that are matching up on multiple mock drafts across the internet. But it's a lot of fun just to keep tabs on players, see where they rise and fall as we go from the combine to free agency leading into the draft. but a lot of fun stuff to cover. Do you have any eyes peeled on any Pacific players?
I think really my attention is on the defensive side of the ball and just the needs there. I do think there is an interested need both at safety, potentially at cornerback. Again, a lot of this depends on who stays and goes in free agency, and I think a lot of that is going to be revealed quite literally in the coming weeks as players start finding new destinations or new deals are made right here in-house.
Yeah, so faithful, stay tuned. We'll have any breaking news Move the Chains episode, so turn on your post notifications on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and we'll see you real soon.